Ladies and gentlemen, Eid-al-Adha, the day of sacrifice, the day millions of Muslims around the world bow their heads, not in defeat, but in devotion. But what's the story behind it? Let me take you back to a man, a father, a prophet, Ibrahim, known to some as Abraham. True faith is not something that shines only when life is easy. It doesn't bloom only under sunshine and comfort. True faith is forged in fire. It is revealed when everything you love, everything you care about, everything you hold dear is placed on the altar, and you're asked to let it go. That's when faith speaks. Not with words, but with action. That is the core of the story behind Eid-al-Adha. The moment where belief turns into surrender. And trust is measured by what you're willing to sacrifice. When Prophet Ibrahim received the command from God in a dream to sacrifice his beloved son, he was not receiving a test of theology. He wasn't being examined on how well he could speak about God or how long he could pray. He was being tested on whether he truly lived what he claimed to believe. Imagine the gravity of that moment. A man who waited years, decades for a son. A miracle given to him in old age. Now being asked to give that very son back to God. It wasn't just about giving up something physical. It was about giving up his future, his dreams, his joy. This was not an academic test. This was a test of the heart. And Ibrahim passed. Not because he understood everything, not because it was easy, but because he trusted God more than he trusted his emotions. He placed God above his own logic, above his pain, above his desire. And that's what made his faith real. That moment when he looked at his son and still chose to obey, that is when faith turned into fire. That is when belief left the tongue and lived in the hands, in the footsteps, in the knife that trembled in his grasp. And it is in that trembling that true submission was born. What makes this story even more powerful is the role of his son, Ismail. When told about the dream, he didn't fight it. He didn't rebel. He didn't run. He said, "Father, do as you are commanded. You will find me among the patient." In those words, another layer of faith is revealed. This was not just the test of a prophet. This was the echo of faith running through bloodlines. A son willing to be sacrificed, not for glory, not for reward, but purely out of submission to the will of God. This shows that true faith doesn't always make sense to the world, but it always makes peace within the soul of the believer. Now think about this in the modern context. We often speak about faith in convenient ways. We say we trust God, but only when the bank account is full. We say we follow His will, but only when it matches our plan. We say we submit, but only when it feels safe. True faith isn't safe. It's radical. It's uncomfortable. It will call you to lay down what you love. It will call you to choose integrity over opportunity, principle over profit, obedience over a poor. Faith will ask you to walk away from a relationship that's pulling you away from God. It will ask you to let go of a dream that's becoming an idol. It will ask you to forgive someone who doesn't deserve it. That's the knife in your hand. That's your altar. And what you choose in that moment defines whether your faith is just a performance or a sacrifice. Abraham didn't make a deal with God. He didn't ask for proof. He didn't delay. He didn't bargain. He obeyed. And in that obedience, he reached a level of trust that became the foundation for generations of faith. That's why the story is remembered every year. That's why Muslims around the world perform the act of sacrifice, not to glorify pain, but to glorify the kind of trust that says, even when I don't understand, I will still obey. Because true faith doesn't need full clarity, it just needs full surrender. The essence of Eid-al-Adha lies far deeper than the physical act of sacrifice. It's not about the blood. It's not about the animal. It's not about the meat. It's about what that act represents. A heart that obeys, a soul that surrenders, and a believer who puts God above all. In the story of Prophet Ibrahim, we find the foundation of this truth. When he was commanded by God in a dream to sacrifice his beloved son, it was not because God desired the taking of life. God, who is the giver of life, has no need for blood. The command was a test of obedience. A moment designed to weigh the depth of Abraham's submission to the Creator. Ibrahim's response to that dream is what gives Eid-al-Adha its power. He didn't question, he didn't hesitate, he didn't delay. He prepared to carry out what God had asked, even though it tore at his heart. That kind of obedience does not come from blind submission. It comes from clarity. Clarity that God is greater than our attachments, greater than our emotions, greater than what we fear to lose. The knife in his hand was not a weapon of death. It was a symbol of surrender. And at the very moment he was about to complete the act, God stopped him. A ram was sent in the place of his son, not because the act of slaughter mattered, but because the spirit of obedience had already been fulfilled. This moment defines the essence of Eid-al-Adha. It teaches that what matters most to God is not the form, but the heart behind the form. The Quran makes it clear in Surah Al-Hajj. It is neither their meat nor their blood that reaches Allah, but your piety. That one verse removes all confusion. It's not about how large the animal is, how costly the sacrifice is, or how publicly it's done. What reaches God is the sincerity, the humility, and the obedience of the person offering it. Too often, rituals lose their meaning when people focus on the external and forget the internal. Sacrificing an animal on Eid becomes an annual tradition, something expected, something routine. But it was never meant to be routine. It was meant to be a reminder that we too have things we need to lay down. We too have attachments, desires, egos, habits, and sins that must be sacrificed on the altar of obedience. And until we understand that, we miss the entire point of the ritual. Obedience is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. It's the decision to pray on time when no one is watching. It's choosing honesty when a lie would make life easier. It's being patient when anger feels justified. It's submitting to God's will when our hearts want something else. This is the everyday sacrifice that Eid-al-Adha is pointing us toward. The animal is just a symbol. The real offering is you. Prophet Ibrahim's story was recorded not just to honor him, but to teach us. He didn't earn God's favor through the act itself, but through the willingness to perform it. That's where obedience lives, not in perfection, but in the intention to obey even when it costs. That's the heartbeat of this celebration. It's a declaration that nothing in this world is worth more than our relationship with the divine. And if called upon, we are ready to give it all back to him. The celebration of Eid is a joyful one, yes, but it carries weight. Behind the feasts and gatherings, behind the new clothes and festive greetings, there must be reflection. Are we truly living lives of obedience? Are we sacrificing what God has asked of us? Have we placed our trust where it belongs? These are the questions Eid-al-Adha places before every believer. The answer isn't written in the blood of the animal. It's written in the posture of the heart. God will test what you love most, not because he wants to punish you, but because he wants to purify you. The test isn't about taking something away. It's about revealing what's in your heart. The story of Prophet Ibrahim is a divine example of this truth. Here was a man who prayed, waited, and longed for a child. For years he remained without one, yet he never stopped worshiping, never lost hope. And then in his old age, when the possibility seemed almost impossible, God gave him a son, a beautiful, righteous son named Ishmael. This child wasn't just a blessing, he was a miracle, a symbol of God's favor. And yet, God asked Ibrahim to give him up. When the command came to sacrifice Ishmael, it was not an ordinary request. It was a direct challenge to the deepest love in Ibrahim's heart. God didn't ask him to give up his wealth, his home, or his comfort. He asked for the very thing that meant the most, because that's where true obedience is tested. Not in the areas we're willing to surrender, but in the ones we cling to the tightest. If faith were only about giving up what we don't care about, it wouldn't be. Real faith steps into the fire. It faces the storm. It lays down the dearest thing and says, even this I place in your hands. The beauty of this test is in how Abraham responded. There was no argument, no delay, no hesitation. He didn't say, God, you just gave me this son, why take him now? He didn't plead for a different trial. He prepared. And when he told his son about the dream, Ishmael didn't resist. He didn't cry. He didn't flee. He submitted. The son reflected the faith of the father. That kind of submission doesn't happen overnight. It is the result of a life built on trust in God's wisdom and love. What many people miss is that God never intended for Ishmael to be sacrificed. The test was never about the outcome. It was about the willingness. God wanted to see whether his servant would hold on to the gift or return it if asked. And when Ibrahim passed the test, when the knife was raised and the heart was steady, God replaced the son with a ram. Mercy flowed in the place of sacrifice, and Ibrahim's obedience was honored for it. This story teaches something profound about the way God works. He will ask for your heart. And in doing so, he may touch the areas that are most sensitive. It might be your career, your dreams, your relationships, your status, or your comfort zone. He will touch the things that define you, the things you think you cannot live without. Not to break you, but to build you. To strip away the illusion of control. To teach you that nothing, no one should sit on the throne of your heart but him. Often, when you're being tested, it will feel unfair. You will wonder why others seem to live easily while you're struggling to surrender. But not everyone is being called to the same level. The greater the love, the deeper the test. If God calls you to sacrifice something great, it's only because he wants to raise you to something greater. He is not a thief of joy. He is the source of it. But he will not compete with idols in your life. If something has taken his place in your priorities, he will touch it. He will press on it. Not to destroy it, but to reorder it. When you understand this, every test becomes sacred. Every trial becomes a moment of opportunity. It's not just pain, it's purification. Not just loss, it's alignment. The things you love most are often the things that reveal who you are. And when you're willing to offer them to God, when you can say, this too belongs to you, then you step into the same faith that Ibrahim showed. The same obedience, the same legacy. Submission to God is greater than any worldly attachment because it is the only relationship that lasts beyond time, beyond circumstance, and beyond life itself. Everything in this world, wealth, power, people, status, even our own desires, is temporary. It fades, it changes, it can be taken away in a moment. but the connection between a servant and their Creator is eternal. That is why in the story of Prophet Ibrahim, his submission stands as one of the greatest examples of faith. And he was not just a prophet, he was a man who loved deeply. He loved his son, he loved his family, but he loved God more. And when the time came to prove that love, he was willing to let go of the most precious thing he had, because his heart belonged first and foremost to the one who gave it all to him. This kind of submission doesn't come from weakness. It comes from strength. The kind of strength that can only be found in surrender. It's not about giving up. It's about rising above. It's about choosing the eternal over the temporary, the unseen over the seen, the giver over the gift. When Ibrahim walked with his son to the place of sacrifice, he wasn't walking in defeat. He was walking in victory. Victory over self. Victory over attachment. Victory over fear. That journey wasn't about pain. It was about purity. His heart had only one master, and that was God. In our own lives, submission often feels like loss. We hold on to things, people, plans, identities, because they make us feel safe, valued, or loved. But those things can become chains. They can start to define us more than our relationship with God does. When that happens, God in His mercy tests us. Not to hurt us, but to free us. Because anything we're not willing to let go of for Him has already taken His place in our lives. And submission is about reclaiming that place. It's about declaring with our actions, not just our words, that nothing comes before Him. The Prophet Ibrahim's test was extreme, but it was meant to teach a lesson for all generations. Every one of us will face moments where we must choose between our worldly attachments and our commitment to God. It might not be a child. It might be a relationship that isn't pleasing to Him. It might be a career choice that pulls us away from faith. It might be our pride, our ego, our comfort. In those moments, submission is saying, God, You are worth more to me than any of these things. And when that submission is real, it transforms us. It shapes our character. It refines our intentions. It teaches us humility, trust, and spiritual clarity. The beauty of true submission is that it doesn't leave you empty. When you give something up for God, He replaces it with something far greater. Not always in the way you expect, but always in a way that serves your soul. Abraham didn't lose his son that day. Instead, he gained a legacy. He gained the pleasure of his Lord. He became a symbol of unwavering faith. That is the power of placing God above all else. Worldly attachments often promise comfort, but they can never guarantee peace. They promise joy, but they cannot sustain it. Only God can offer peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. Only He can offer joy that flows even in hardship. Submission is the key to unlocking that kind of life. It is the declaration that says, this world may offer much, but none of it compares to my devotion to You, O Lord. The struggle between holding on and letting go is real, but when you choose God over the world, you don't lose. You rise. You rise above the noise, the temptation, the distraction. You begin to live not just for today, but for eternity. That is why submission to God is greater than any worldly attachment, because it anchors you in something that cannot be shaken, even when the entire world shifts beneath your feet. Sacrifice reflects discipline and spiritual priorities, because it forces a person to confront what truly matters in life. It isn't just about giving something up. It's about willingly laying something down for a higher purpose. That's what makes sacrifice powerful. It draws a line between desire and devotion, between what we want and what God wants from us. The act of sacrifice, as seen in Eid-al-Adha, is a deeply symbolic and spiritual action. When Muslims around the world offer a sacrifice on this day, it is not merely a ritual of slaughter. It is a declaration that their priorities are aligned with the will of God and that discipline is stronger than desire. In the story of Prophet Ibrahim, we see a level of discipline that defies human instinct. To prepare to sacrifice his own son, his miracle, his joy, his future, was not just a test of emotion. It was a test of spiritual order. It was a moment where discipline overpowered attachment, where obedience was chosen over personal comfort. That doesn't happen by accident. That kind of response only comes from a heart that has been trained, a soul that has been conditioned to place God first, even when every part of the human self wants to hold back. It's not easy, and it was never meant to be. But discipline never is. Spiritual discipline is not about punishment or deprivation. It's about focus. It's about remembering why you were created and living in a way that reflects that purpose. When a person makes a sacrifice for God, whether it's time, money, comfort, ego, or even letting go of something they deeply love, they're expressing more than obedience. They're showing maturity. They're saying, I understand that life isn't about pleasing myself. It's about pleasing the one who gave me life. That's what discipline looks like. It's praying even when you're tired. It's giving even when you're in need. It's showing mercy when you've been wronged. It's choosing righteousness when temptation screams your name. Sacrifice during Eid al-Adha is a reflection of this spiritual priority. The animal that is offered is a symbol. What matters is not how big the animal is or how much it costs. What matters is the mindset behind it. Did the person approach this act with humility? Did they use it as a moment to reflect on what they've done for God lately? Did they evaluate their heart and ask themselves what still needs to be surrendered? These are the internal questions that transform a physical act into a spiritual one. Without discipline, faith becomes weak. It becomes reactive, not proactive. It becomes something we turn to only when life is hard, instead of something we build every single day. Sacrifice trains the soul to remain anchored in God, even when the waves of life try to pull it in every direction. It keeps your spiritual priorities in check. It reminds you that comfort is not the goal. Closeness to God is. That's why those who live with sacrifice at the center of their lives often seem more at peace, even in hardship. Their peace doesn't come from what they have. It comes from what they're willing to give up for something greater. In a world where we're constantly being told to indulge, to accumulate, to hold on tightly to every blessing, sacrifice is a radical act. It's a quiet rebellion against selfishness. It's a bold reminder that not everything you can have is something you should keep. And that's where discipline enters again. It's not just about what you can do, it's about what you choose to do for the sake of your soul. Spiritual priorities aren't measured by how loudly we speak about faith, but by how silently and consistently we act on it. Every time you make a sacrifice for God, even a small one, you're building a life that says, I live for more than myself. When discipline and spiritual priorities come together in the form of sacrifice, it transforms not just what you give, but who you are. You become someone who walks with purpose, lives with intention, and worships with sincerity, you become someone who knows that letting go of something for God always leads to receiving something far more lasting in return. God will provide when you obey. Not always in the way you expect, not always in the moment you desire, but always in the way that is best for your soul. The story of Prophet Ibrahim is a timeless reminder of this truth. He was asked to do something unimaginable, to sacrifice his beloved son, the very child he had prayed for, the one who represented answered prayers and divine mercy. And yet, when the command came, he obeyed. Not because he didn't love his son, but because he loved his Lord more. That kind of obedience demands trust. And that kind of trust opens the doors for God's provision. At the very moment Ibrahim lifted the knife, God intervened. A ram was sent from heaven, a substitute for the son. That act was more than a divine rescue. It was a revelation. It showed that when a believer submits fully, when there is no hesitation in placing everything on the altar for God, then provision follows. But the provision does not come before the obedience. The test must be walked through. The knife must be lifted. The heart must surrender. Only then does the ram appear. God waits to see the seriousness of your submission before he sends what you need. Too often, people expect provision without obedience. They want the reward without the sacrifice. But it doesn't work that way. The blessings are on the other side of the test. God does not ask for obedience because he needs it. He asks because you need it. Every act of obedience purifies you. It sharpens your faith. It detaches you from the illusion that you are the provider of your own life. When you take that step, no matter how terrifying or uncertain, you are saying to God, I trust you more than I trust myself. And God honors that kind of faith with provision that is tailor-made, perfectly timed, and divinely appointed. Sometimes the provision is not physical. Sometimes it's peace in the middle of chaos. Sometimes it's strength when you thought you had none left. Sometimes it's clarity when confusion clouds your path. But make no mistake, when you obey, God responds. He never overlooks an act of faith, no matter how small. Even when no one else sees what you gave up, what you sacrificed, what you endured to remain true to him. He sees it all and he provides. The key is to obey before you see the provision. Obedience that waits for proof is not obedience, it's negotiation. True obedience walks forward when the path is invisible. It lets go of the branch without seeing the net. That's when you find that God was there all along, that he was never asking for the sacrifice to take something away from you, but to prepare you to receive something better. Ibrahim didn't lose a son. He gained a legacy. Ishmael didn't become a victim. He became a symbol of devotion. Through their obedience, provision came, not only for them, but for generations after them. This is the pattern of God's mercy. He tests to elevate. He asks to refine. And when he sees sincere obedience, he opens doors that no one else can open. Even when it seems impossible. Even when the odds are against you. Obedience has the power to shift reality. Provision is not about how much you can plan or control. It's about how fully you can submit. When you move in obedience, you move under the shadow of divine care. Your needs are no longer yours to manage. They are his to fulfill. God's provision may not always look the way you imagined. You may not receive the exact thing you thought you would. But what you do receive will always be what your soul needed most. That's the difference between worldly help and divine provision. One gives you what you want, the other gives you what you were made for. That's why obedience is never wasted. It builds a life of trust, where even in uncertainty, you are certain of one thing: your Lord sees, your Lord knows, and your Lord will provide.